When I attended Lemoyne College, there was the usual mass for the students on the weekend, similar to this, around Halloween. And on this particular weekend, it also had the Halloween social, where students wore costumes like any Halloween party. However, the students were also encouraged to wear their Halloween costumes to the mass that evening. This one particular year, Mike, who was trying to get one of the co-eds to notice him, found she was attending the mass and going to the Halloween social. He found this out at the last minute, and it was too late to buy a costume or make one up that required some forethought and some time. After asking several people what to do, he decided to gather sticks and branches from trees in the nearby woods, had leafy branches coming out his hat, and tied sticks to his body, and his costume was being a tree. He then went to the Mass, and upon entering, the Jesuit celebrating the Mass asked Mike if Mike wanted to read the Gospel. Mike, seeing his intended in the congregation, said yes, not knowing the Gospel was the one I've just read. He did a good job proclaiming, but the redness in his face kept building and showing through. I later asked Mike if he had planned this. Mike gave me a look and said he felt foolish doing this, and he would not have done it had he known what the gospel was. It did work out, though. He and Mary are still married and together today. Mike was not a short man like Zacchaeus, but he stood taller than what he was that evening. He did suffer some foolishness to make it through this plight, and he would not have been able to do that had he been too prideful a person. From what our gospel says, Zacchaeus was a short man. He was a tax collector, so named because he collected monies from the Jewish people for the Romans. The Romans were in power, and the Jewish people did not like the Romans. Zacchaeus collected much more than what he should have at the expense of his fellow Jews, as Zacchaeus was also a Jew. This overcharging of monies made him a rich man, and one who may have been short in stature, but large in ego. He thought he could do anything he wanted. So the day Jesus came to Jericho, where Zacchaeus lived, crowds surrounded Jesus. Zacchaeus could not see over the people in front of him. So he tried to push his way through the crowd, thinking they would let him pass. But the people would not let him through. So Zacchaeus climbed a tree in order to see Jesus. This would have been highly undignified in those times. He may have been large in ego, but he actually put that pride aside and shimmied up the tree in order to see what Jesus looked like. This is normally something a prideful person wouldn't do. Imagine someone like Donald Trump climbing a tree to see anyone, even Jesus. It doesn't seem like anything that Donald would do. It seems his pride would certainly get in the way of doing something that would seem foolish to those around him. But Zacchaeus didn't seem to care. He climbed the tree, and probably many laughed. They did not miss seeing him, especially when Jesus called over to him to come down so Jesus could go and stay at his home. Zacchaeus did not offer hospitality. Jesus called to Zacchaeus to offer hospitality. Jesus selected and called Zacchaeus singularly and on purpose. Zacchaeus was able to put his pride aside, even to the point of looking foolish for Jesus climbing that tree. There is a feast, or a saint, whose feast day is October 2nd. His name is Saint Andrew of Constantinople, fool for Christ. The man lived in the 10th century, forsaking all worldly goods to live in patience and humility for Christ. As you read the story of St. Andrew, it goes a little deeper, talking about him acting insane in order for him to reach that level of asceticism he wanted to in the church. It did work, Andrew eventually ended up having visions, most notably one of the Blessed Mother praying for and protecting the people of Constantinople. So this idea of pushing pride aside and not worrying about looking foolish is not a new idea. The reason we have to push pride aside is so that we can hear God's calling. Like Jesus calling to Zacchaeus to give Jesus a place to eat and stay, we are asked to do things for God that we could not hear if we let our pride get in the way. Pride doesn't allow us to hear what is around us. It gives us a false sense of greatness, an overly high sense of self-worth that may come crashing down on us when we meet the first little bit of adversity. We can see from many contemporary sports figures and political figures that this is true. Pride truly separates us from God because pride makes us unable to hear what He's telling us. This is why it's considered to be the worst of the 7 deadly sins. Pride may even lead us to take some accomplishment or characteristic about ourselves that may not be anything major and make it into our identity, like many who rely on certain things, like athletes on a certain prowess, that they have to use steroids to build themselves up and how it comes all crashing down on them. The battle is to not let the pride grow into something that would be so strong we couldn't allow ourselves to act or feel foolish at times when we need to hear God. Mike didn't let pride stop him from proclaiming the gospel that night in college. Zacchaeus let his pride go by climbing that tree. They both may seem a bit foolish, but it was worth it. Zacchaeus was called by Jesus. Without pride in his way, Zacchaeus made amends and changed his life. Jesus said that day, salvation had come to Zacchaeus' house. What is it that Jesus could be calling us to do, but we let our pride get in the way?